Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
We are going to be going over Canada's response to the attempted assassination on Donald Trump, Elon Musk considering building an Iron Man suit after assassination attempts, conservatives calling for an emergency meeting as attacks on Chinese Canadians by the CCP skyrocket, as well as Ontario physicians demanding urgent support as 2.5 million patients without family doctors, Ontario government speeding up alcohol expansion amid the LCBO strike, and the Trudeau government spending $9 million on luxury condo for the New York Consulate General. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up on this video and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as it really helps this podcast grow, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got Canada's reaction to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Poilievre doubling down on his commentary, the military investigating soldiers, and university profs disappointing. First, Poilievre doubles down in the face of criticism. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is standing firm on his statement condemning the assassination attempt on former US President Donald Trump and expressing relief that the shooter is dead. Poilievre condemned the attack and expressed his relief for Trump's safety, adding, quote, "I am also happy that the suspected shooter is dead. Democracy must prevail." Prominent progressives criticized Poilievre's statement, arguing that it was inappropriate for a potential prime minister. In a follow-up interview, Poilievre stated, "He killed another human being. I don't care what you think about former President Trump. The reality is, he's a human being, and so was the other innocent victim who died here heroically protecting his loved ones." He remained unapologetic, stating, "That's life, and frankly, I don't care." So are Pierre Poilievre's statements worthy of condemnation?
Political allegiance aside, this man tried to assassinate a former president by firing bullets into a crowd, killing an innocent man, protecting his family, while injuring two more. He got exactly what he deserved. Politics has become a super sensitive, don't offend anyone landscape, which has been on steroids over the last 10 years with all this DEI, equality crap, and honestly under liberal rule. I think Poilievre is just kind of bringing it back to the way it should be. I mean, because no rational person would feel bad for the guy that got murked. Maybe, I shouldn't say that. Nope, I'm good with it. Gonna leave it there. No rational person. Yeah, we're good. Now, on the other hand, we have seen a lot of people under fire for expressing disappointment that Trump wasn't assassinated. And as you mentioned, that includes military personnel and several university teachers. But here's the thing. Given the divisive rhetoric that led us to this point, these comments, while troubling, are not really too surprising. But it does highlight that the liberal propaganda machine has been so effective that ordinary citizens are wishing death on a political opponent in what should be a civilized democracy. So this is pretty insane.
It's weird seeing the flip-flop between, because on one hand, you've got them saying that Trump is the reincarnation of Hitler and he will end democracy in America. And then on the other hand, you've got them now wishing him well and saying that this isn't justified and such. Well, to me, you got to pick one or the other. And this is something that I've really been thinking about in regards to even me. I have no problem pointing out that a lot of the intellectuals guiding public policy in the West right now are Marxist and communist in nature. And you can get into that same idea of, okay, is that divisive and dangerous rhetoric, quote unquote? But I don't know if this is just me justifying my own position here or whatever, but even I was going back and looking at Google Trends of, say, even the search terms far right versus far left. And it's almost 4-1 the terms that far right get weaponized against far left. And then I was thinking as well, okay, should I be considering dialing back on this? But then what I've realized is it puts you in a really tough position, because on one hand, you've got a genuine strategy of Marxists and communists in the past was to label anybody to the right of them a fascist and call them Hitler and call them Nazis. And so that is a Marxist tactic, but then you do risk adding to the divisive rhetoric by, say, calling them communists or Marxists back. And so you end up on this really weird.
You're in between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. I understand what you're saying. It's challenging because you don't want to add to the divisive rhetoric. And this sounds stupid, but we're on the right side of things. I know it sounds dumb, but I understand it does. But if you're being logical, and I don't agree with everything the right does, but you and I are kind of on a daily basis almost identifying where this country is going and why that's a problem. In fact, that is the foundation of why you and I do what we do. This is not necessarily my dream life, okay? But we're doing it because it's a fight that needs to, it's a cause that needs to be fought, right? So that's how you and I look at it. And where we're seeing this country go is in the wrong direction. And here's the thing, look at all the liberal policies put into place by Trudeau over the last 9 years. Take a look at them and show me one that actually worked. Because I guarantee you say child like $10 a day childcare, I can rip that apart. They clusterfuck that up so bad. Pretty much anything that he's done, but on sort of a bigger scale, they are moving towards communism or Marxism. They are ruining the economy. They are making this country unaffordable. They are doing all of the wrong things. It's just that the people in power want to stay in power. So they're saying whatever they need to. Like I've had this conversation. I have sort of this theory where when a political party's in power for too long, they do more insane shit to stay in power because they run out of valuable policy. And I'm of the mind that's exactly where these people are. So it is tough. And I know I overcontextualize that a lot because I don't want to be like, well, our side's right and their side's wrong. But the thing is, if you don't sort of explain that we are sort of just trying to maintain democracy and push the country back in the right direction, then it does sound that way. Do you know what I mean? You kind of have to clarify that we are fighting the right fight. Otherwise, we are just adding to divisive rhetoric. If you don't explain yourself, then you are part of the problem in a sense.
And I think that's maybe the big difference that I can point to is that I am very well versed in both fascist history and communist history, and I very much understand what separates them and also what is very similar about them, where their policies come from, their underlying thoughts on all of these things. So I like to think that when I call these things out, I've got a little bit more of a basis to go on than just, because this is something that I've noticed is that authoritarianism has just become synonymous with fascism. Anything that reeks of authoritarian nature is just instantly labeled you're Nazi, because in most people's minds, that's the only historical reference that they have to label something as authoritarian.
Sure.
But there's so many different ways that an authoritarian government can come about, which is typically through more fascist side or more communist side, or in a theologic sense, even just what you see in a lot of Islamic countries and such. So there's different ways, but once these things all come together, they are very much the same. It's just the justifications that are used in order to centralize power and wield it against the people.
I think that's exactly what I'm trying to say. In a nutshell is that we're fighting the dragon. You just have to identify that we're the knight and they're the dragon. But it is the truth, especially if you look at historical examples. It's just hard to say because we both look the same. That's all. Well, we don't have blue hair.
Another thing that I've been thinking about in regards to this topic as well is you see it being constantly brought up of, under no circumstances can you justify political violence, or we need to denounce all political violence. Politics is violence. Politics is discussing how you're going to use force in society, because the government in and of itself is force, right? We make rules, you follow these rules, or we put you in jail.
Yes.
It is a constant threat of force and violence. So, to me, it's a little bit of a redundancy to say political violence, because politics in general is just violence, or at least the constant threat of
No, you're right. You're right. I guess it's interesting when you think about it that way, because the entire apparatus represents violence if necessary. But anything happens to those people, it's unnecessary violence. It's kind of interesting when you frame it that way. I mean, still not really down for killing people, but I understand where you're at.
No, for sure. But I think if you look at, say violence being used against the government, you can make a very good case, and I'm not condoning this. I'm of the idea that once the violence breaks out, I'm just going to retreat into a forest and just like, you guys fucking sort it out. I tried to have a conversation while we could, but
I feel like I'm more of a William Wallace type. Like I'm going to get into it 100%.
Yeah.
I was born to lead an army. I'm good.
No.
I just don't agree with I just don't agree with the Canadian Army military. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't agree with the ideological crap that's running the Canadian military. Anyway, that's my side of it. Cool. You're in the forest. I got the axe. We're good.
Well, see, my philosophy on all of this does come from a very anarchist sense, which is believing that nobody has any natural authority over one another. And so therefore, I'm just against the government apparatus in general. But what you see breaking out right now, And this is what I've been calling to about the whole kind of growth of the state, is that most people, they try to bicker about whether it should be Trump or Biden or whether it should be the left or the right that's in charge of the government, where my diagnosis of the problem is that the government itself is just too big. I don't care who's in charge of it.
Totally agree.
I want it to have less power.
I think that's the biggest problem. So that's a really good point that I want to touch on for a moment, because I think a lot of people have trouble sort of articulating or maybe highlighting exactly what their issue is. You get a lot of people saying, well, Poilievre's not the answer. No, but it's a bad system. And sometimes there's two bad choices. I actually think Poilievre's a good dude. I've met him. I think he's a nice guy. I think he'll do a great job inside a very bad system. That's, again, the problem. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. Like, I'm of the same mind that I say this all the time. The empire needs to fall. This is way too big. Like I were talking about in our last episode, I do think the idea of government is to help society. That was what it was originally formed, was to help society. Now it's its biggest burden. So it's like, it doesn't really matter who's in there. The problem is that it's far too big and has way too much control over our lives.
So in that sense, with this kind of setting the stage, if people do genuinely believe that Donald Trump is the next fascist leader of the world, well, like, in my heart, I have a really hard time not justifying that in their position. Now, I'm not saying I condone or support what happened, or that I wish it went another way. I think if it did go another way, there would have just been mass chaos.
It would
have been really bad. But like, putting myself in their shoes, if they genuinely believe this, then how do you not say that protecting yourself would be the right move?
I guess you have to decide where you are in terms of the scale of what's happening in society. It's kind of like the Overton window. If we have a full-fledged revolution and there's warring factions to overthrow the government, all is fair in love and war. But we're not in a war. Neither is the United States. Well, the United States is in a lot of wars, but not domestically. Well, kind of. You know what I mean? So that being the case, it's like, if you consider the acceptable violence, it's almost like if you go away to war, it's acceptable to kill people, but you can't do it here for no good reason. You know what I mean? Well, you can't do it in general. But I think it's the same thing. As you look what's happening there, and it's like, they have built society in such a way that that is not an acceptable approach at this point. I think if you did have a full-fledged war, we'd be having a different conversation. But again, society kind of lives in these windows, right? That's what we all do. If you think about it, if you go to places like the Middle East, women don't wear bikinis because they'll get thrown in jail. It's like socially unacceptable. What I mean is, we all kind of within society operate within the confines of kind of this bigger macro picture. It's a slow-moving thing that does shift over time. And us using violence against one another in a political sphere, we're not in that space right now. Now, if you were in Africa right now, the amount of governments that have been overthrown over there in the last decade it would blow your mind. That's how they operate there. It's not what we do here. But again, to your point, if we did get to the point of violent revolution and that's what was needed and that's what was happening, different conversation, right? But we're not at that point. So it's completely unacceptable. And I think the intention in general now, in Western democracy anyway, is that we are a civilized democracy and we don't behave that way. Now, I know in saying that we sort of take power away from the people and we say, okay, well, the pen's mightier than the sword or whatever. You can talk you out of a situation. Sure. I hope that that's always the answer. And I think a lot of people in society do too. So to your point, I'm just not sure we're going to get there anytime soon, which doesn't really make your opinion null and void, but I think it makes it valid, just not in today's society, not in the Western world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess what is that line? Because to me, it's not necessarily that take it away from both either Canada or America and just talk kind of generally here about government and society, where it's like, what is that line where, say, protecting yourself or returning violence would be justified? It's funny. There's actually a saying by Thomas Jefferson. He said, "The tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants from time to time." Like pretty like, but see, this is what I mean is, so like this is what's so crazy to me is because we put, say, the founding fathers on a pedestal and say, like, these were the men that created the modern world. But then you look at the people that we worship and you're like, they were totally okay with this. If America didn't win the Revolutionary War, they would have been looked at as terrorists, the founding fathers, they would have been looked at as
they would have been
terrorists.
hung very quickly.
This is something that I'm
Again,
trying to.
I agree. It's just in the 1700s, that was what the society's window looked like.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you're in Africa, that's what the window looks like. We're in Canada or in America. The window is just not as wide open.
Yeah.
It's just, I agree. Look, it is tough. And, you can point to tons of points in history where political violence was necessary, especially if you have an authoritarian government that is they've got your foot on their neck. Pardon me, they've got their foot on your neck. I mean, I get it. I guess my point is we try to operate in a way that is civilized, and we are part of a society where that is not a part of how things work. So it is completely unacceptable. But I know what you mean. Like, when is violence? Well, 1-to-1.
Because then you get the frog in the boiling water scenario, right?
Absolutely. But I guess it's like,
what's that temperature where something like that is justified?
I totally agree. And I think that as a society, there's enough independent thinkers that they would decide when that time was. It would boil over. It might take longer now because there's a strong government apparatus that's always fighting it, but it would get to that point if it needed to. I have faith in the fact that, like, if enough people can eat, they're going to find a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think what they do, I think what governments do, and maybe this is a bad thing. It seems good because there's no violence, but maybe it's bad in the sense that they do just enough so that you don't get to that point. They probably know where it is. They probably know that line. They probably try to keep you just far enough away from it where they can do whatever they want, have as much power and profit as possible, and they just keep you away from that line. I'm sure they know, and I'm sure they put in things to stop it from happening again, because like you said, how was America founded, right? So, I mean, you look at those things and I don't know, you want to hope that people are decent and that we're on the right track. That being said, it's probably not the case.
What you see from the machinery, so to say, the system, where they're constantly kind of trying to provoke, let's say, go back to the Trump scenario, they're constantly trying to provoke the people within Trump's camp, his followers, Trump himself, all of this in order to react in a way that would justify them cracking down, right? It's kind of like the kid poking somebody while the parents are looking the other way, then that person gets upset, reacts, and then that person can then cry to the parents or the authority figures to say, look, I need you to step in and reprimand this person for their behavior. And this is something that I've talked about actually with Marxists in general, right? Which is, it's the idea of mid-level violence is what they call it, which is you get to this point where they push forward with, say, let's use the transgender pronoun stuff as an example. They push forward with this. They say, we are going to make it law that you have to refer to us the way that we want you to. So we're going to compel your speech, which is something that has never been done in the Western world before. And then, so you either shut up and let that happen, or you push back. And if you push back in a way that could be interpreted as hateful, then they just use that again to justify why they need that policy in the first place, right? So that is their whole strategy, is the mid-level violence. And I look at that very similarly to the Trump thing, where it's like, we're going to call you Hitler for 10 years straight almost. And then when we attack you, we're going to say that, or not we, but when, say, somebody attacks you, we're going to say that this is a fault of your divisive rhetoric.
Oh, and that's some of the things you're seeing in mainstream media, but I think people are becoming more aware.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy on CNN today. I sent you the link, or sent you the video rather. He was an ex-military sniper, and he was on CNN. It was interesting because they were really, like, as soon as he said this, they were like, oh, they were trying to pull back as quickly as possible. But basically what he said was, he goes, there's too many things, like you said last time, there's too many things that went wrong here for this to have been a mistake in terms of how the Secret Service managed that situation. And then he goes, I'm starting to wonder, and he said repeatedly, I don't want to sound like a conspiracist. Because I'm starting to wonder, he goes, first they try to censor the guy, then they try to throw him in jail, now they try to kill him. He goes, it's just the way it looks. And CNN was right away like, oh, how do we deal with this? Oh my God, what have we done? But the thing is, you're getting guys that are in politics and in the military, they're saying this, and this is on CNN, right? That is directly up the left-wing ass. And these things are being said on their network, and it's out now, obviously. I don't know if they're going to put it on air like on cable, but it's on the social media. But you look at this and you kind of go, people are becoming aware of the game they're playing. And that's what you kind of hope happens. Otherwise it does get very chaotic and very violent. And like you said, someone else, I think, you mentioned something earlier, but someone else trying to kill him today.
Not him, but there was just somebody shot outside of the RNC meeting that was happening in Columbus. And so apparently somebody was carrying a weapon. Obviously, this was just breaking as we sat down, so I don't know all the too many details. But apparently, yeah, somebody outside the RNC had a weapon and local police took him down. But yeah, even last episode, I asked the question, is this going to normalize these kind of things? And I think it is. And so I don't think it's useful. I think you have every right to defend yourself if somebody is encroaching on you, but I don't think it's ever useful to go on the offense with violence politically, because two things happen, which is either that violence gets used in order to justify cracking down on you, or most of the time when violent revolutions occur, it's psychopaths that end up at the forefront of them and in charge of them. And then you usually just end up with a worse tyrant than you overthrew.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of feeling on this is I'm disappointed at what the Democratic propaganda has done to liberals right now. Like I said earlier, now ordinary citizens are wishing death upon a political opponent in a civilized democracy. And you know what? The thing that frustrated me was actually the number of people that were wishing that he had been shot, like killed rather. Because it really goes to show how deep the propaganda is and how bad, like that's pretty dark. That's almost COVID level bad, where people are buying into this and buying into all the other crap that was happening through that and not asking any questions. That's almost as bad, to wish that this guy had been murked. And now again, you're seeing today that someone else showed up with some guns and wanted to finish the job, so to speak. I think society is actually in a more vulnerable position than I had originally thought.
Oh, yeah.
And I think if this doesn't slow down quickly, what I said last time is going to happen. You're going to see these militias of vigilantes that are going to be there supporting and safeguarding Trump and these Republicans. And I mean, you know what? I'll leave with this. One of my good buddies, Meg and I were looking to go into the States. He's down there and he said, do not even think of stepping foot in this country until after the election. And even then, wait another 6 months.
Dude, and I've been trying not to sound like an alarmist about this kind of stuff, but I know how these things play out. It usually both sides just end up going back and forth. We've joked about it many times in the podcast, right? Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And those actions and reactions just end up becoming larger and larger and larger until eventually one camp ends up kind of asserting itself over the others. And that's not a scenario that I hope for by any means. But when I look at it, I can't help but to think that that's logically where this ends up. Well, here's my thing. If you can actually get access to a presidential candidate or a president without the Secret Service's help, if you can actually get access to them, if this is easy enough, if one goes, they're both gone. You're going to get a tit for tat situation. 100%. Well, actually, we're seeing too, right? Like, it's funny. People are calling on Poilievre to tone down his rhetoric, right? Oh, well, you might think that you should not refer to Trudeau as a wacko like you normally do. First of all, it's wacko and calling somebody a threat to democracy are two very different things. And secondly,
plus Trudeau's a fucking wacko.
Yeah, and secondly, on the other side of it, you've got the Trudeau camp constantly trying to liken Poilievre to Trump. Yeah. And then you go, okay, so what really are those? What's that rhetoric you're tossing at him? It's way worse. And so that is actually, if anything, that pisses me off about all of this. It's the hypocrisy. It's the complete double standard here of, if you call me a wacko, you are condoning threats upon my life, but I can call you Trump, who I also think is Hitler. It's like, come on.
Well, this is the thing, right? This is one of the things you're getting from the Democrats or the left these days. Rules for us and not for them. There's two different sets, right?
Yeah.
It's just the same thing as, like, I'm not going to get into it, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
But all right, moving on to our next story, we've got Elon Musk considering building an Iron Man suit after assassination attempts. So Elon Musk is increasing his security measures after an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump during a campaign rally. Musk revealed that 2 assassination attempts had already been made on him in the past 8 months, both involving armed individuals who were arrested. Musk noted that these are, quote, dangerous times. Following the incident, Musk was urged by supporters to enhance his security, with some suggesting he build a metal suit of armor. As it turns out, Musk previously explored the idea of an Iron Man-like suit, meeting with an inventor in 2021 who created a prototype. However, it is unclear if the project advanced further. Are those who oppose the globalist order in danger?
Aren't they always?
Yes.
If Elon wasn't worth more alive than he was dead, he wouldn't be here, because he's definitely a thorn in the side of the globalist world order. But in my opinion, I think he's the most important person on the planet. I do. I mean, people could argue that, but all right, who's more important? Because he's in everybody's top 3, if you're being honest. I think he's number 1. He's capable of moving the technological needle by hundreds, if not thousands of years. No other human in our lifetime can do this. But despite all the bad press he may get, the powers that be need him. They use him for his rockets. They use him for his satellites. They use him for whatever I guarantee is next, because there's going to be something else.
Well, even look at the whole Starlink situation within Ukraine, right?
Exactly. So. That being said, a very few people are that important, right? Like take Jeffrey Epstein, for example. Rich, powerful, became an inconvenience, died in 2 days. Super, super suspect situation there. We kind of all know what happened, right? So, it's one of those things, though. Like what's that saying? If you play with fire, you get burned, right? And anyone pushing a globalist agenda with enough power will torch you the moment you become a problem.
If you look at that as the inevitable steps that they take, where they first try to cancel you, then they try to censor you, then they try to put you in jail, and then they try to kill you. He's already a fair ways down that list, because you look at what's happening with the European Commission, with them trying to fine him and essentially make his ex business untenable if he doesn't go along with their demands.
He'll bury them,
Yeah, so you look at it and you're like, all right, you're already a little bit pretty far down that list.
He's too big, he's too powerful, and he's too necessary. How many governments around the world are using Starlink?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In all these wars, they're using them. They're using it. People are like, oh, we don't need him. NASA's using his rockets. Everyone's using his rockets. They're going to need his rocket to go with the people that are up at the International Space Station, because Boeing continues to fuck shit up. So, I mean, like he's just too valuable. You know what I mean? So I think that's his blessing in this situation. I was going to say blessing and a curse. I don't think it's a curse. I think the curse may be the fact that he's standing up to the globalist agenda, but his blessing is that he's too valuable, right? You can't find another guy like this. That being said, when those people, whoever run the world, feel that he's worth more dead than alive, then I would be worried. Then hopefully he's got the Iron Man suit by then.
See, I think he's already probably there, because I don't think these people care about material progression as much for humanity as they do just maintaining their power, right? I've said before, a lot of these psychopaths, and we have to realize that these centralized areas of power act like magnets for psychopaths. And those types, they would rather rule over hell than to not have any hold on power, right?
Yes, but how many people that are in important places need his technology and what he's capable of doing? So it could be this. It could be you've got two sides to this. I imagine there are psychopaths that just want him dead, 100%. But I think there's also a large portion of people, I would think more of the monetary people, like the Rockefeller family, more of those people that would take value in, hey, we want to continue running and ruling this world. The technology he's creating is going to make this easier for us. That would be, I think that's my opinion, that there would be the two sides that are kind of pushing back and forth over when they feel that it's time. Hopefully it never happens. I love the guy, but I'm just saying that's what I think.
It is interesting to think, though, as well, that people tend to view human progress as, say, a collective achievement. And it's really not. When you look at big progress, like, say, here's a good example. The invention of a few things, like the dishwasher, the washing machine, and the tampon, and contraception, the pill, those 4 did way more than any political movement ever did to liberate women. Like, really, it gave them freedom. Say, for instance, with the pill, then okay, I'm now not burdened by pregnancy, and I can go after my own aims.
I hope someone. I want to hear women chime in on that. I want to hear this. I agree with you. I think that actually makes sense. But I just want to hear because I'm sure there's enough women that are listening that are going to have an opinion on that.
But so you look at that and you go, okay, it's usually a handful of people that propel humanity forwards. In the case of, say, Elon Musk, with his rocket technology, that's a massive one. What he's done for the EV market, that's another huge one. doing Wi-Fi through satellites. That's going to be massive for, say, certain areas like Africa, which don't necessarily have the infrastructure and would have to rely on, say, a more decentralized aspect of technology in order to get access to the internet and such. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that, yeah, it's crazy as to just how much humanity can be pushed forward by just a handful of people. And it is scary to think about, okay, what would humanity lose out on if a guy like Elon was taken out? Like, you're looking at a lot of progress for all of humanity potentially being nullified or not being brought to fruition simply because of that assassination attempt.
Right, exactly. Well, that's kind of the way I agree, and I think that's why I believe he's still safe. One of the things that I would highlight, because Elon, as much as he may not say he is, he's an entrepreneur. He builds businesses. Sure, he's an engineer. I think that's what makes him a weapon, is that he can do both. He's a great entrepreneur and a great engineer. But you look at how entrepreneurs have success, right? And most times when people have success in their lives, there's a big spike early on between their 20s and 30s, and then they curtail. And this isn't just athletes, it's scientists, it's a lot of people. Pretty much your valuable years in terms of contribution tend to be your 20s through your 30s. But entrepreneurs have their best decade in their 50s because you continue to get better and better. You learn more, you have more wisdom, your network grows. There's a lot of reasons why. So even though his engineering prowess may curtail in his 50s, I think he's going to be an even better entrepreneur. I think he's got a few more tricks up his sleeve. I think he's going to do more for humanity. I think he's accomplished a lot. I think sometimes too, when you're that intelligent and you're that capable, there's a sort of compound effect on how you solve problems and see the world. And I imagine that he's probably, like I said, got a couple more things he's doing that make him too valuable. And I believe that those things are probably already moving. And I also believe people that are important in the world already know that. And I think that's what keeps him safe for now. I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I think that is a contributing factor. You know,
did you see him come out too and say that he's going to start, not only has he openly endorsed Trump now, but he's also going to start funneling a lot of money. I think he said he was going to contribute $45 million a month.
A month, yeah, to a super PAC, yeah.
That's crazy.
Wild. But I mean, that's what happens when you try to assassinate the opposition in a system like that, right? Every time they try to do anything to take Trump down, he just becomes more and more powerful. And you know what? Like, I agree with what Elon's doing, and I agree with the support Trump is getting right now, because it's absolutely ridiculous. This assassination attempt is the symptom of a very poisonous political system, and it is on the left. And this is what they've done to society. This you reap what you sow. This is what they've done. They deserve to be put out. And again, look, I don't think Republicans are the answer to every problem, and I don't think conservatives are either. And I'm sure eventually they'll go back to the same point.
I actually think politics in general aren't the answer to a lot of problems.
I understand that. Unfortunately, the problem is how do you implement a new system with all these people, and the apparatus is too big and you're too small. They will just, too many people are making money. There's too much power involved. My point is, sometimes I think you got to realize you're playing a game of Monopoly, right? I say this all the time. You may want to look at life in a different way, but if you want to win at life, you have to realize it's a game of Monopoly. You got dropped in the middle of a game. You don't get to change the game. You can learn the rules and win, or you can sit there and bitch about the game you're playing, right? I agree with you. Politics are not the answer to a lot of the problems we have, but this is the system that's here. And right now, you do need a Republican government and you do need a conservative government in Canada to start correcting course.
So talking about the whole going against the global order and whatever, Noah Yuval Harrari, who is the author of Sapiens, and he's also he's kind of one of the intellectuals behind the whole quote unquote Great Reset movement.
I like the book Sapiens though.
Yeah.
It's a good book.
It was an interesting read, but he's also the same guy that says that we should just, with the invention of AI and essentially making a useless class of humans with the invention of AI, what we should do is just drug them and keep them entertained with video games. I'm not a huge fan of the guy. No.
I just like his book. But I believe in not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The book's good. The guy's a douche.
But anyways, so this is what he said in regards to Trump and the New World Order.
Are you concerned that Trump might be elected again shortly?
I think it's very likely. And if it happens, it is likely to be the kind of like the death blow to what remains of the global order. And he says it openly. Now, again, it should be clear that many of these politicians, they present a false dichotomy, a false binary vision of the world, as if you have to choose between patriotism and globalism, between being loyal to your nation and being loyal to some kind of, global government or whatever.
So he's essentially saying it right there, right? That the
Trump is going to end globalism in a sense, which is
and also further, like, because globalism kind of just entails also say the free trade and economics between all.
When he says that, I think about it in terms of more the nefarious side of things.
Yeah, but I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast before, right? Where they are trying to instill a global government through the mechanisms. That's the stuff I was referring to. UN and NATO and all of that. That in the WHO, that nations would cede their sovereignty to a higher power on the global stage. And so even he's saying it right then and there, right? That if Trump is elected, it would be the death blow to that movement.
Great.
And so, I mean, at that point, if the people that want a global government are saying Trump, it would be the death blow to their plans, at this point,
tell me how I can vote for him twice. Yeah, like, you know what I mean?
Like, you're kind of selling me on it.
Yeah, exactly. So I agree. That's actually pretty wild to hear him say that. But it's arrogance, man. When you hear people say stuff like that, it's like the arrogance to believe that your path is better for everybody and you know better. You just
and so
get what you deserve.
So coming back again to Elon Musk and him allying himself with Trump, as much as I hate presenting binaries, I don't think the world is left versus right. I don't think we're in a fight versus liberalism versus liberalism versus conservatism or whatever. These are all I think they're distractions, but all of this, I think there is definitely a binary fight between globalists and anti-globalists. That I think that's really what it falls down to.
I agree.
And there's globalists in both sides of the political aisle for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in, like, we said earlier that you kind of highlighted something that maybe people couldn't quite articulate. It's the same sort of idea, because I think that's what the fight really is right now. The fight for the West is about maintaining individualism, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, in a nutshell, left versus right now. You know what I mean? And a lot of the things that are happening with the compelled speech and a lot of other crap, that sort of funnels into that equation in sort of the more globalist view.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got conservatives calling for an emergency meeting as attacks on Chinese Canadians by the CCP skyrocket. So a group of conservative MPs are calling for an emergency parliamentary meeting due to a significant increase in harassment and violence against the Chinese community in Montreal by the Chinese Communist Party. CSIS documents reveal that Canada is a high priority target for interference and intimidation by the People's Republic of China, with Chinese agents showing little concern for repercussions. The RCMP has reported 6 credible cases of harassment, with the victims expressing fear for their lives and their families. In response, the Quebec RCMP recently launched a social media campaign to solicit tips from the public regarding criminal activities related to Chinese interference. This follows their March 2023 announcement of an investigation into illegal Chinese police stations in Quebec. These alleged police stations, operating under the guise of community service organizations, have denied the allegations and filed a defamation lawsuit against the RCMP. Despite these efforts, no arrests have been made in Canada, contrasting with the US authorities who have detained individuals involved in similar operations. So why is this issue not being sufficiently addressed by the Canadian government?
Well, I think it just goes to show that politically the Liberals are in pretty deep debt or in the pockets of the Chinese in several ways. And that's all you're seeing here. I think that if you know you can go into my backyard and bully my kids, you must have a lot of control over me. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So I think it's just China knows they can do what they want.
I actually think that's exactly what it is. And also, I wonder, well, first, we know that, right, our government has been compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. We have members of parliament that are openly working with them for their causes. Also, apparently members of the Senate as well. And so, you see this where they're intertwined, and then also something that Sam Cooper has highlighted as well, right, is the underground casinos, which we know they were using as a honeypotting kind of scenario where they can get dirt and blackmail the politicians. Yep. And so I wonder if how much of it is, say, Canadian politicians not coming down on these sorts of scenarios simply because they know that if they crack down on these people and these organizations, that all of a sudden some footage of them engaging in prostitution in an underground casino or something of that type, all of a sudden gets leaked, right?
Well, they're compromised in one way or another. They're compromised in a way like that, or they're compromised economically. Yeah. They either took money for something, they've given up something, they've given up control over something, they owe people favors. One way or another, they're compromised. That's what this screams. It screams that our sitting government is completely compromised, right? Yeah.
And so to me, I think that's pretty disgusting that our government is just, I mean, even you look at the operations that these people are running through here, right? Through fentanyl and drug trafficking and all of this. This is all through this group, right? These are the types of people that are harassing Chinese Canadians that speak out against the Chinese Communist Party. Those are the people they harass, which because they're using their freedom of speech in Canada in order to disparage the Chinese Communist Party.
You know, it's interesting when you think about it like that, because we're in a situation where you and I do not agree with the government on pretty much everything, and we're very outspoken about it. My concern would be, and I don't have it because I think we're going to see a change in government. If you had another liberal government again, how close does it get to that type of system where you and I go to the States, or you and I go to Cayman, or you and I go somewhere? We're just not really safe, because you and I would be probably some of the most outspoken people in Canada on these topics, I would think. So if that became an order of operation for them, where would we go?
The good news is that I don't think Canada, as a country, has the strength to muscle its way into other nations.
No, absolutely not. They don't have the military. No, absolutely not.
So I think in many of those countries, even if Canada was like putting pressure on them, they would just be like,
"Shut up, bitch."
Fuck off. Whereas when it's China, you know, it's the number 2 superpower in the world.
China's the big enough bully that they can put you down and take your lunch money. So it's just what it is.
And also, too, we have to consider when it comes to China as well, a lot of these countries, whether it be America or whether it be Canada, they're so reliant on China, even just economically, just from a trades perspective.
For sure. That's what I meant by economically compromised.
I don't want to piss you off, because what happens if you start fucking with my supply chains?
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly it. It's like if they're deeply embedded enough in your economy as well, you can not even be compromised in the sense that you were screwing a hooker. Whereas, like, you know, you've got X number of businesses that, and your economy's 10% dependent on X. And if China's X, you can't do much. And like you said, Canada doesn't really have the power or the force or the military prowess to go enforce their rules. They can't really, there's no tit for tat.
Or even economic-wise.
No,
either, right?
They've got no way to do anything to even punch back.
Yeah.
So it's, man, Canada just got wedgied. Jesus. Jeez.
I think it's also interesting how, when it comes to, say, China or the Soviet Union, all of these nations that become extremely hostile to the Western world, we are at fault for giving them the scenario where they are, because I say we, but it was really America in the 90s, what they were attempting to do was bring China into the fold, and because they thought that, well, if China will become more like us and they'll become under the Western control and they'll be able to benefit us that way. But what ended up happening was they ended up muscling back against us. And now what do you see our leaders doing? Which is, we need to become more like China in order to compete with them, right? There's that famous clip of Trudeau saying he admires China's basic dictatorship because it allows them to go greenest, fastest. You look at what the World Economic Forum said at the beginning of the pandemic was that China was the model and all of this, right? So you see this state apparatus with China of them weaponize. You've made this point before, right? Where all of these companies become like chess pieces that the Chinese Communist Party can use. And now what you're seeing is Western governments trying to have to adopt that mentality in order to compete with China.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where you can't go back in time, and hopefully we will learn from these mistakes, but we sort of are where we are right now. And, you know, China always says that you can't decouple from China. And I know they're saying this because they're in economic trouble, and they are, and they're going to have to find a way. And there's some rhetoric going back and forth between China and NATO right now. But decoupling right now from China would be catastrophic economically for the entire West, everybody. So it's this weird thing, right, where they've kind of played a different game of economic warfare, and they've sort of got a lot of people by the balls right now.
Yeah.
Us apparently especially.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. And I think I hope that lesson that we learn is to stop creating the monsters that we end up having to fight. It's the same thing that happened with the Soviet Union was, it was FDR who first recognized the Soviet Union as a country. And then also the amount of trade that America was, sure, there was sanctions and stuff and tariffs in certain places when it comes to the Soviet Union. They weren't allowed to trade weapons and such, but they were allowed to trade all the individual components. So it's like, if at the very beginning of things, America just said, nope, we understand that your ideology, which is Marxism, we understand that your ideology is a fundamental threat to our way of life. And therefore, any inch we give you, any rope we give you will just be used to hang ourselves.
You know, an interesting comparison to make would be the fentanyl trade coming out of China. So they are killing 100,000 people a year right now between Canada and the United States. It's the number one killer for, I believe, people between 20 and 50, maybe 20 and 40. The number one killer is this fentanyl, is this nonsense. The amount of fentanyl going into the United States every year is enough to kill everyone on the planet 4 times. That is insane.
Yeah.
That is so wild. So when you think about that, so they passed a law saying, well, we won't sell fentanyl anymore. No problem. We'll just sell all the components. Over 90% comes from China. The remainder comes from Mexico, which they get from China. So it's exactly what you were saying with the weapons with the Soviet Union is China's got everyone by the balls. That America is basically accepting the fact that 100,000 people are dying a year in their society, young, capable people, because China's able to push fentanyl on them. It's pretty wild. Like that's how, if you want an example of how disproportionately out of whack things are, there's one for you. That's how much America needs China. That's how much Canada needs China that we let this happen.
Yeah, I agree. And that's
pretty wild.
That's part of the reason why I'm so against this globalism stuff is because then when you intertwine yourself with hostile nations to this point, when they start wreaking havoc in your own countries, you're handcuffed.
What can you do? Exactly.
And so it's like you can't be this dependent on other places around the globe in order to keep the lights on.
No, and I agree with globalism to a sense. Like I think that we should have. I agree with international trade 100%. I just think like you said, if you become pod committed or super dependent on one nation that's doing everything, you get into a situation where, like you said, you're handcuffed, and then what? Here we are.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Ontario physicians demanding urgent support as 2.5 million patients are without family doctors. New data reveals that over 2.5 million Ontarians are without a family doctor, up from 1.8 million in 2020. From April to September 2023 alone, 160,000 people joined the list. In 2022, over 11,000 patients died on surgical waiting lists, and as of October 2023, more than 200,000 Ontarians are still waiting for surgery. A report highlighted that having a family doctor improves health outcomes and reduces healthcare costs. It also concluded by stressing the need for immediate support to ensure family doctors can continue serving Ontarians effectively. So is it time for Canada to question whether a government monopoly on healthcare is a good idea?
It has been time. According to a report by the Commonwealth Fund, Canada ranks last among 10 wealthy nations in healthcare outcomes and primary care. Talking about a system where people wait months for critical surgeries and treatments, while better solutions and innovations are constantly stifled by government control. Healthcare cost Canadians $344 billion in 2023 with no signs of slowing down. And this equates to $12,242 per taxpayer. That's important. In contrast, the Netherlands tops the list by offering the best healthcare by employing a public-private hybrid model. Dutch citizens pay an average of $2,070 per year on healthcare, combining premiums and deductibles. So our system costs taxpayers 600% more than the leading nation, and we're dead last with 2.5 million people in Ontario alone. And Ontario's a population of just over 15 million. So we're talking about 17% that don't have a primary care physician, and things are getting worse. Our government has unequivocally proven that they're not up to this task. So opening up to a public-private model is really the only solution we have.
Yeah, and people talk about down in the States and healthcare costs an arm and a leg. What I think would end up happening, because this is the case down in the States, is where your healthcare cost or your insurance is tax deductible. But then also, I think what you would end up seeing is way more innovation in the healthcare sector.
Absolutely.
Because there would now be a profit incentive, whereas the government has zero incentive to either come up with new products or anything of that
sort. Or do a better job. I say this all the time. Capitalism, the value of reward in capitalism is that it creates an incentive structure for progress. And humans are creatures of progress. With no incentive structure, we will not progress. This is a huge problem for Canadians.
Yeah, and so you look at what it breaks down to for the average taxpayer, right? You said the number was roughly $12,000. If you look at what the average American pays for health insurance down in the States, it works out to roughly $300 more. But if you were to use that as a tax write-off, you would actually end up saving a lot of money. And then half of that $12,000 is that the average American pays is usually for insurance deductibles. But what that would end up creating
so if you're
is
healthy,
an incentive where, okay, if I stay healthy and I don't need to go actually get any prescriptions or go to the hospital, then I'm only going to pay my $6,000 insurance premium. So
and it's still tax deductible, so it ends up being about $5,000 all in versus 12.2.
Yeah. So to me, it seems pretty straightforward when you look at it from a not only financial perspective, but also just being able to allow competition so that when organizations like the government stop failing, people start failing, they have alternative options, alternative roads to go down, because we don't have that. I remember even actually it was about Christmas where I got, I don't know, some sort of stomach flu or something. It was crazy. I was out for like 4 days, couldn't even take a sip of water. My roommate at one point looked at me, thought I was dying, and was like, "Do I need to take you to the hospital?" And I just said, there's zero chance I'm going to a hospital. Like, yes, I probably do need to go to the hospital right now, but I'm not going to.
Well, if you survived, you didn't need to go.
Yeah. Well, that's the idea where now, like, I would literally have to think my life is on the line for me to go to a hospital.
See,
now.
You know what's interesting for me? I actually have changed my tune a little bit on the medical system. Just after having a baby and using the healthcare facility here in Orangeville, they were amazing. But I've said this for a long time. I think we do reactive health very well. You break a leg, they know how to fix it. I don't agree with our proactive health strategy.
Right.
I don't think that's the game plan. But one thing I would say is everybody that I've met in the profession is amazing. They all, maybe not everybody cares, but everybody I met cares. Everyone does a great job. I'm so grateful for the people that work in the system. I have no problem with the system. And if I need it, I will go use it. The problem that I have is the macro apparatus that the government runs, because they've totally fucked things up.
100%. Well, that leads us into our next story, which is Ontario is now speeding up alcohol expansion amid the LCBO strike. So Ontario Premier Doug Ford's government is accelerating the availability of ready-to-drink cocktails in grocery stores due to a strike at the LCBO. Grocery stores licensed to sell beer and wine can begin ordering these cocktails and large packs of beer starting Thursday, 2 weeks ahead of the originally scheduled August 1st launch date. So is this an appropriate response to the strikes?
Yeah. So the other day I was up at Sobeys and the cashier, super kind lady, she was just like, "Oh my God, Jonathan, I'm so tired." And she was a little older. I'm like, "Oh, what's going on? You're just, working your shift." She's like, "We are busy all day long since the LCBO shut down." And first of all, maybe Orangeville has a drinking problem, but it just goes to show like, hey, people don't care. People are, they're going to find a way to get their booze. This is a better system. And look, we all know competition would be better for Canadians, no matter what. You know what I mean? We've seen this time and time again. When you monopolize, we're not allowed to monopolize the market. Only the government can. We know that that's not good for us. Like you said earlier, we would get better pricing. We would get improved delivery methods for sure, more convenience, and probably some cool new products, right? So I mean, this strike highlights exactly why we need to deregulate this market.
Yeah, and people push back on it. I've seen a couple people say that we're on the wrong side of this issue because of two reasons. One being that LCBO employees will lose their job, and my argument to that is they should not be free from market dynamics.
Try being an entrepreneur in the restaurant business and see what the government does to you.
Yeah.
Hog off, bro.
And second, those jobs wouldn't be lost. They would just open up to the private sector.
Absolutely.
Because like you're talking about, those cashiers are now more busy, so they would need to hire more cashiers.
100%.
So those jobs end up just getting translated to other places in the private market rather than from the government. And then the other pushback that we get on that topic sometimes is how the proceeds from the LCBO go to healthcare and education, which is roughly the profits are, I think, $2.4 billion per year. And so even if 100% of that was to go towards healthcare and education, it wouldn't even make a dent because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars.
I wonder what this would look like. So you're saying $2.4 billion is the profit that goes, right?
Yeah. Well, no, that's all of that's their net profit.
I understand.
How much of that net profit goes to those, I don't know.
But even if it's the full thing, what incentive do the LCBO apparatus have to be efficient? Zero.
Yeah.
They do not care. You take those same sales that they get and you put it in the private sector, and then you see how the tax system works. I bet the government gets more money.
Actually, that would be interesting. Yeah. Because, did the math. And if you look at the convenience stores in in Ontario, it's just under 7,000 and it works out to it. Now, obviously, certain convenience stores would be more busy than others. But if you were just to average that out and give it to each convenience store, it'd be roughly $350,000 worth of market share.
Right.
So if you were to boost that, then yeah, you could, the government still gets their money from taxes.
Exactly, because the private sector needs to be efficient to make their money. So there's going to be more taxes on the back end of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Brutal. Let's go. Doug Ford did one thing right. Love it.
All right, last story for the day. We've got Trudeau government spending $9 million on a luxury condo for New York Consulate General. The Liberal government has purchased a $9 million condo in New York's Billionaires Row as the new official residence for Tom Clark, Canada's Consul General in New York. Clark's new home is a 3,600 square foot property located at 11 West 57th Street near Central Park. So how does it make you feel that the bureaucrats who mandated us into economic serfdom throughout the pandemic are now living large at the expense of taxpayers?
Here's the question. How do we have a system where purchasing condos in New York on Billionaires Row for political representatives is acceptable? So we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? How did this become the system? I mean, Trudeau's salary is 400 and change a year, 400,000 a year. He just threw $9 million, 20x his salary at a condo for one of his buddies. We got to ask ourselves, how is the system built in a way that allows them to do something like this? Like I said earlier, the empire needs to fall.
I think all of those things need to be tied to the average Canadian. So for instance, I think what you get to spend on a home for that, like the fact that you can go spend $9 million and say that this is what's needed for the Consulate General, like what you're telling me.
You see this? This is the tall, skinny building that looks over Central Park. It's one of the nicest properties you're going to find in New York.
Yeah. So why do you need that? Why do you need to live larger than everybody if you're here to serve the people? So if you're to serve the people, then I think your residence should be tied to the amount of money that Canadians are able to put towards their mortgage. What is the average Canadian able to afford in a mortgage? That's what you're allowed for your property. If you're telling me you serve the people, I think the same thing should be enacted for salaries as well.
The pigs are just a little more equal. I totally agree with you.
Because I know you've made the argument before that in politics, maybe they should be able to make money because then it will attract a higher caliber of person.
I think the politicians need to get paid more money. Here's the thing. You let Trudeau, what's his expense account every year? 50, 60 million? Guaranteed it's more. I guarantee you it's more. Because just his travel alone, I guarantee you it's more money than that. The guy makes 400 grand a year. He has to spend that much. Reduce this dramatically. Pay attention to it. Dial in, hold people accountable, but pay the prime minister $2.5 million a year. You will get better people. Honestly, for $2.5 million, you'd get some of the best people out there. That's a reasonable, maybe more, maybe even as much as you could get as much as $5 million. That's a wild thing to say. But if Trudeau spends 50, 60 a year on expenses, not that crazy anymore.
Okay, but if you get the reward for ruling over people, which I already disagree with, but if you get to be financially rewarded for that job, I think there should also be bumpers on place for if you fail to
100%.
do a quality
There
job.
needs to be way more accountability. My whole thing is
There should be certain selective KPIs where
Agreed.
if the average Canadian salary or productivity or GDP doesn't rise in direct correlation with, say, the inflation rate, death.
Okay, so how about this?
Death?
No, we discussed political violence earlier.
No, but it's not unchecked political violence. You're signing on to it. You're
No,
saying
you're not going to attract the right people, Liam.
If
It's not
I
going to
don't,
happen.
if I don't do my job
Here's a better idea.
correctly,
Okay, we're
to
figuring
the
this
gallows.
out. So a million guaranteed, up to 5 for performance bonuses. Way better system. People are going to dive in on that. People are going to do it, and it's going to go well. Here's the thing. You and I both agree the system is broken, but we also know we're playing game Monopoly. We can't break the system today. We can't do it. Maybe not even in our generation. So that's the system. How do you get the right people? This is not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. Accountability, KPIs, bonus structure, more money as a base, and super, super accountability for all this other spending.
But here's the thing: is sticks work better than carrots, and that's why the government uses them so much. Is that the punishments? People fear a negative outcome more than they wish for a positive one.
What's the relevance?
Death bonus. I'm saying
you will not attract the right people.
No gallows then. No gallows. How about you have to go live in a forest off the grid? You're not exile.
So you're running next? 'Cause apparently that's where you wanted to end up.
You're exiled. If you take the job as ruler and you don't fulfill your duties or improve the state of the people that you rule over, then you're exiled. You no longer have a place in our society.
We can try that next.
I'm doing this with a lot of tongue in cheek. I don't think that's a legitimate strategy, but I don't hate the idea at the face of it. All right, let's head over to our Substack where we'll answer some audience questions, including how is it possible to put an end to all this and recover the country we used to have? Why is this division running so rampant? How do we wake up more to unify and talk? How do we dig out of this massive hole the Liberals and NDP put us in without taxing us? And why is Jagmeet Singh banned from India? So if you want to hear us talk about these...
That's wild.
Oh, no? I know the answer, so I'll fill you in. So if you want to hear us break down these questions, head over to our Substack where you can find the link in our description. And for anyone who doesn't do that, we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.